I'm John Caspian, and this is your painting guide for beginners. So today we're going to be talking about how, let me turn this music down a little bit. That should be better. We're going to talk about how we are going to learn what paints we need to do to start our figures. I've got a figure that I took literally 15 minutes to paint. I'm going to show that right here on the back side. That's using two paints on the back of this cloak. And I'm going to zoom in here so you can see that. If anyone has any questions throughout this stream, all you've got to do is ask in the comments on YouTube, Facebook, wherever, and then I can see them and read them. So I'm going to make sure that the focus here is on correct on this figure, and you can see it. And there we go. You should be able to see that. Pretty nice. So as you can see here, I've got two paints, but they look like different colors. But all it is two paints, and that's really important, especially as you're starting out and just beginning. The two paints that I have here are Army Painter War Paints Army Green, right there. And come on, reflection. There we go. And Agrax Earthshade. These are two types of paints. One of them is called a base color. So the base color is the first thing you do once you've primed your model, or if you're using this, which is previously called Nolzur's figures, Marvelous Figures, or whatever the name of it was before. But it is the D&D figures that are pre-primed. So they're perfect for beginners. I think they are $4 a pack, maybe $4.50 a pack, something like that. You typically come with two figures, sometimes three or four, depending on what you're getting. The larger guys are one per pack, but they're super good for starting out in your painting. So the Army Green is the very first color, and that's the base tone that you do. So your figure starts off, if it's these Nolzurs, then it is $4, like I said, but it comes off as white to begin with. And I don't know if I have a white one nearby. I think I painted all of mine. But what you do is you put this on with your base brush, any other brush you want to, and then you simply come across with your Agrax Earthshade or any other shade. And what a shade is, it's called a wash. And as you can see in there, it's liquid. What that does is it gets into the creases. So you see where the little brown spots are in the cape? It gets into the creases there, and it also changes the tone of the color. So what happens is, if we're talking about light, then let me zoom back on. No, we can keep it zoomed on here. If we're talking about light coming here from the right side of the screen, that is a daylight bulb, which means it looks like daylight light. So when that hits, it creates a shadow, and every time light refracts and makes a shadow, it changes the tone a little bit. So in painting, what we want to do is try to recreate how light hits, but we have to exaggerate it, because in real life, you might be at Gigabyte's Cafe, where you have the top-down fluorescent lights, and you're wanting to emulate maybe a light coming from over here. You might emulate a light coming from up above. It might be coming sideways. So this special effect on his hand is actually going to be a lightning bolt. And the lightning bolt, I have to emulate the light source coming from there back onto the body. So I'm going to have some blues coming from there to kind of fake the effect of light coming from his hand. So the base coat, get your basic tone on there, and then your wash. And a lot of different brands, like Army Painter does a wash, and then other brands like Citadel does called a shade, but all that is a wash. And again, that's a liquid, so you have to have you typically want a special brush. I like this one. Where did I put it? There it is. A shade brush. Compared to a base brush, quite a bit larger, as you can see there. And then a detail brush is even smaller, and those are meant for the very fine details. So let me show the shade next to it. So you see that those two big difference. And the Citadel shade brush, which we have at the store, is actually really nice. I like it. It's got a fine point to it, and what you don't want to do when you're doing shades is to glop onto the model, unless you're looking for a very specific effect. But what you don't want to do is you open up your bottle, and then you just dunk your brush on there, and then just start slopping it over everything. You want to be very controlled with how you do it. But when when you're thinking about your paints, all you've got to do is think about your base colors, then your shade or wash, and then a highlight. And Citadel calls that heavy metal, so it has an apostrophe in heavy metal. You can look it up on White Dwarf and all those other places. And basically all that means is when you use your shade, the shade is a darker color than what your base coat is. So if I've got this army green and I look at the Agrax next to it, notice how much darker that is? But in the bottle, this Agrax looks almost black. You can see a little bit of brown around here. Once it actually gets onto the model, it's going to turn into a brown. It's not super, super dark brown, but it's still a fair difference. If your shade or your wash is around the same color or brightness, then it's not going to have a huge effect. It's got to be darker because the idea is it gets into the recesses of the model. So you can see there, if it doesn't get into the recesses, then something is wrong with the model probably. All you do after you use the base coat, use your wash, is you go back over the wash with your base coat to do a highlight. And this is sort of a mid-level highlight. If we're thinking about color theory, then you have your very brightest colors that are the brightness is up here, right? As you can see in my hand, if it's reflecting the light. See how white the hand is? And then on the bottom side of my hand, it's very dark. So this is called contrast, is the difference between the white here and the dark there. So the more the contrast, the bigger the difference between the two. The gray wall behind me doesn't have very much contrast. There's a little bit behind me here, and then it goes up a little bit. But that contrast is not as much as, for instance, this side of my face to this side. You can see that back side there. If I use my hand, you can actually see the contrast lessens because I am reducing, or I'm reflecting some of the light from my hand onto my face. So what we're doing to make a more dramatic effect on the figure is increasing the level of the brightness of the brights and the darkness of the darks. And that's where the wash comes in. So the two basic types that you need are base coat and a wash. Once that's done, you want to get a slightly brighter color, and I don't have my slightly brighter Army one yet, but a close one might be something like Kraken skin. Now that's going to be a little bit too green if you compare those two. It might make it a little bit too cartoony looking, so I can combine this and mix it in with the Army green to make just a slight highlight up. And you can do that if you're doing a very dramatic, let's go with a Citadel paint here. And we're going to go from maybe Techless blue and then highlight it with a Lowthorn blue. For Citadel, these are called layer paints, and layer paints are basically a highlight. You have your base paints, which tend to be thicker, and so their layer formula is a little more, not runny, but it's a little less thick. So you got Caldor Sky as the base coat, and then you do a mid-highlight with Techless blue, and you can see there the difference between the two. Slight contrast boost, and then there is Lowthorn blue. Big difference in the three of those. If you just compare these two, it's not too much. As soon as you add that in, you can really see the difference. And then what you do here is you can use Drakenhof Nightshade, which is a blue wash, or Nuln Oil if you want to tone down the saturation of your colors. And then you can increase that contrast between the two. Let me check here on Facebook real quick if we have any questions. Audio is choppy. Huh. Okay. I appreciate that. Let me see if this is that doing anything. Let's turn that down. Let's get the music off. Can you hear me better now, or is it still having issues? I appreciate you telling me that. Don't know why I would be doing that. Sometimes the audio interface that I'm using has issues. So let me know in the comments if that's better, and I'll keep on going. Still choppy? Not better. Let me take a little break here real quick. I'm going to put us to the little menu. I'm going to see if I can figure this out real quick. All right, so I am listening to my audio now, and it seems on my end to sound fine. So it might be something weird going to our streaming server. We go to a streaming server that takes us to YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook. So yeah, it seemed to clear up a little bit. This is better? Okay, so I re-plugged in my interface, and life is good. Thanks for staying with me, y'all. Where was I? I was talking about the difference between contrast of colors. So as you can still see here, working fine? Awesome. Good to know. So as you can see here, we have this slight highlight. This is the base coat that is on top of the washed down base coat. And then you can get a highlight color. So when you're looking in the store and you are trying to find like colors and schemes and stuff like that, there's a couple of concepts that you want to be aware of. The big one is saturation. Saturation basically tells you how far away from gray you're taking a color. So if I have my default, where's my gray? It's around here somewhere. There it is. Mountain Stone. So that pretty much matches the background that's behind me. And with zero saturation, you get black, you get white, you get gray, anywhere on that spectrum. Luminosity simply tells you the what from black to white, what level. We usually say 0 to 100. The very brightest you can get is 100. If I put my hand like there, that is 100 brightness, because it's saying that's so much light that it can't even see what's the skin tone there. So it looks washed out. So if you ever hear someone say, "Oh, that video is washed out," they simply mean that there's too much light going on to whatever it is, so subject or backdrop or whatever. And so when you're talking about hue, you can have a very high luminosity color with a very high amount of hue. Better now. Great. Wonderful. Thank you. So the hue is going to, for this one, is actually less than the hue for that one. Now the luminosity is higher on here, but if the hue were also high, that would look a little more similar to this. It's tough. You can't have perfect luminosity at 100, being the highest that you can get, and have a hue. All you can do is say, if you're familiar with red, green, blue spectrum, you can get your full red, green, blue theoretically at about halfway. The closer you get to the highest luminosity, the more you get toward white. So if you get a light red, you get pink. If you start combining red with yellow, you get the orange, etc. But eventually you go toward white. So when you're thinking about how to get the maximum saturation, you're going to go with a mid-range color. Mid-range colors being something like, I believe this is Calidor Sky. For Citadel, it'd be Calidor Sky. You have pure red, pure green, pure blue if you're doing Reaper paints. And then Army Painter has the equivalents that are basically a pure color. So pure color is going to be about mid-range. In order to get a highlight on that, depending on whether or not you want your figure to be warmer or cooler, you change basically what color you highlight with. If I'm thinking about a cooler model, I'm thinking about something like an Ice Troll from War Machine and Hordes, or any model where you thinking about them being more in winter or having a feeling of being a little more evil, maybe. Evil tends to be colder, cooler, or depending on what race your figure is, those can also be on a cooler side. So when we're talking about cooler and warmer, all we mean is whatever your color is here, from that, does the feeling of that green pull more toward the reds or more toward the blues? What coolness and warmth has to do with light is that the brighter the light is, the cooler the look. So you get all the way to white is how we typically think of full luminosity. But if you're looking at the Kelvin scale, the least amount of heat that you have, and for a visual, imagine a blacksmith and they've heated up steel. Steel, the actual color of the steel will change red, orange, white. The hotter it gets, the difference of that color gets. So when you're looking at daylight outside, the reason it's refracting blue is that the heat is very, 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 very high. So the Kelvin level is super high. You get that blue overcast. But when you're talking about making things warmer, you're thinking about a lower level. So when something, let's say a light like this one, you get further away from this light, it actually is going to cast a little bit of a warm shadow on it, relatively speaking. It's not a huge difference, but if you look up Kelvin scales and light on Google, you'll see a whole bunch of stuff about it. I mean, the science of light is fascinating. Photography is, I'm a photographer, so all my stuff is based on light, but with paints, you're trying to emulate that effect. So let's say you get your Calidor Sky, which is a great basic blue for Citadel, or if you get a pure blue color from Army Painter, you got that one, and then you can darken that with something like Nuln Oil. It's hard to use a red on the blue because it muddies it up and makes it look a little more purple. So in order to warm it up, you basically take a little bit of the saturation out of the blue. So you can go with, I think I have it here. Yes. McCrag blue. So if we're looking at the difference here, let me make sure that I can see. Turn the music up a little bit. See here, the McCrag blue is this one, and it has a little bit less of the saturation of the blue. A little bit less of the level. So when I use that as a shadow, it pulls things down. So if you're a complete beginner and you're looking for paints, simply find one color of the main color. So you got red, green, blue, pink, purple, whatever one you want to start your figure with. All you need is about 5 paints to fully paint up a figure. So I'm going to switch this guy around to the front, and I'll show you. So with him, even though he's a little bright, I have the green and the wash. And then if I can get the angle right, I've got a flesh tone, which for Citadel is something like Cadian flesh tone. It looks kind of pinkish. Kislev flesh is more of my skin tone with a little wider. And then we have a metal color, which is what his chest plate is. And then you have some sort of brown. The brown, they can either be a redder brown or a more neutral brown. Don't really go on the cooler side, but a red brown might be something like a nut brown, something that pulls a little more red. That could be a good contrast if you're wearing something that's blue. It's subtle, but it does make the difference of the brown and the blue bigger. Cool, right? So as you see here, I've got the green and the wash, that's 2 colors, brown and metal, and then I've mixed a little bit of white with a gray. Sorry, with the brown, as you can see there on the book. Basically 5 colors if you're just looking for a bare bones look. Now, if I pull this out back, and I'm going to fix the camera so you can see this, it might not show up too well on Facebook with their compression of the video codec, but you can see there, you can see the difference of the greens and the browns. Those aren't level differences as much now, because I'm going to zoom in a little bit. The level difference is not that big. So you don't see a lot of the shadows in the cape on the inside. You don't see a lot of shadows on the armor itself. You don't see shadows on the underside of the rope that's flying off of them. And you don't see shadows, well, maybe natural shadows, but you don't see shadows here on the book. So what you're doing then is you're trying to recreate those shadows. So you've got your base colors. All you've got to do is maybe take a little bit of black or a dark red. If you've got the green, and I've already washed it with the Agrax Earthshade, and you're going to bring that down and maybe a little bit warm. And that way it looks a little bit muddier, a little bit dirtier. And I'm going for a dirty effect, especially on the backside there. If I were going for a clean-looking cape, I would simply do a Nuln Oil, or I might do actually more of a greenish wash. And that would simply take the overall luminosity of the color down. So the concepts, again, you're looking for is hue and luminosity, and then temperature. Temperature being all the way blue is the highest temperature, and then all the way low is more like a reddish. Cool, right? Awesome, y'all. Thank you so much for joining me. If you have any questions, put it in the comments. I'm going to stay on for just a second. If that makes sense to you, if anything I said doesn't make sense, let me know, and I can try to explain that. If you come to the store, Gigabytes Cafe, we have our expert painters. We have Mr. John Galvin, store manager, but all of our staff members paint. At least all the ones that are on the miniature sides, I know for sure. Everyone paints. We have some expert painters, people who do commissions, etc., and they're very, very, very knowledgeable on the subject. They can help you learn the different kind of paints that you might need, and they can pick out the ones that you want. A lot of the difference in the brands has to do with dripper bottles versus the caps. Some people love Citadel and will never go away, but besides some of the colors, this little kind of irritates me a little bit. It just gets messy, and then things dry out a little bit. One trick, if you're using Citadel, make sure you shake it after you've closed it. And what that does is that helps seal the paint so that it doesn't dry out. Some people forget that. You got to make sure you seal it properly, and seal it in the back too, not just in the front. Shake it, and it's done. And then Reaper, we also sell. I don't think it's on the rack right now. And then Vallejo. And different brands will have different viscosity, and viscosity is, you know, how smooth the paint is. Citadel is a little thicker, so they recommend, and if you ever watch Duncan, it was 2 thin coats. You get water and you thin it out how much you want to. Brands like P3 are already a little bit thinner, closer to the ink side. And so in another stream, I'm going to tell you all about the different types of paints besides the base coat and the washes, because there's glazes, there's all kinds of different things that are awesome and they add different effects. But just for beginner, all you got to know is that it is base paints and the washes. If you can know those 2 things, you can do pretty decent tabletop quality stuff. So thanks y'all for joining me. Take it easy, and we will see y'all for another stream probably this afternoon. Bye y'all.